Hello, everyone. This is Kim Knowles of Prairie Rivers Network, joined by John Deluria of Vote Solar. We are recording this today because we have a couple of proposals for the Solar for All working group, and we know not everyone can always join the Solar for All working group calls with everything that's going on. So we're providing this recording to you, with the hopes that you can review it and provide feedback when it's convenient for you. So there's a couple of problems that we noticed in the Solar for All program, two of which we want to address today. That first one is that there really doesn't seem to be any good place, good or easy place for prospective customers to, quote, sign up for the Solar for All program. The second problem we want to try to address, is that there just hasn't been enough interest among developers in the Solar for All distributed generation subprogram. So I'm going to try to offer a proposal today for the working group to consider that addresses that first problem, and John is going to go into a proposal for that second problem. So again, the first problem we're seeing that we want to address is, and I should say that Prairie Rivers Network, I did some grassroots education under a contract with the IPA, and this is a problem that arose for me when I was doing those programs. I would go to a church or a facility and give a presentation. People would get excited and they would want to know, well, where can I go to sign up? And I really didn't have any place. So that's what we want to do. We want to create an onboarding portal for prospective Illinois Solar for All customers. So we're imagining that in part as a web-based sign-up tool, again, to facilitate customer engagement with the Solar for All program. As we envision it, we think it should be administered by the Solar for All program administrator. And again, it would be a website where potential customers would sign in, provide essential information, and eventually get access to approved vendors that are operating in their geographic areas and in the sub-programs that those customers are interested in. We envision that information being managed by the program administrator, who would also conduct income verification and an initial solar readiness assessment, and based on those findings would generate approved vendor information for customers. So one of the questions that raises is, well, what kind of information should we be asking people to provide? And I'm just going to go down through a list of some that some of us have come up with. This isn't meant to be an inclusive list, it's just ideas. And again, we ask you to review this and think about it, because the more ideas we can come up with in advance, the better. So some obvious ones are, of course, name, address. We're thinking we should try to gather, if we can, if people are open to it, some demographic information, such as age, race, ethnicity, sex, gender, whether or not the customer is in a single family household or a multi-unit, and if a multi-unit, how many units. We thought it'd be important. It's obviously important to know how many people are in the household, what that household income is, whether or not the person owns or rents. We also think it's important to know whether or not that person is already qualifies for assistance programs such as SNAP, LIHEAP, or Social Security Disability, or other programs. We thought about asking some questions whether or not the household has undergone any energy efficient upgrades to their home. Clearly, for the other for the nonprofit public facility subprogram, is this a nonprofit or a public agency? And if so, is it a critical service provider? And then a question about what type of solar installation that person might be interested in, distributed generation and or community solar, or the nonprofit public facility. So again, that's not that may not be an inclusive list. We'd love to hear other ideas. But so the person would go to the website, enter that information, and then as we're envisioning it, we're not quite sure about this, but that portal may at that time be able to generate some information, but perhaps not, because at some point the program administrator needs to follow up with the customer and collect additional information, or use that information to assess whether or not that potential customer qualifies based on their income, and whether or not the residents to do initial solar readiness assessment on the residents. So at some point, this tool we're imagining would generate a list of approved vendors. And so this raises another issue about, well, who can be on that, who gets on that list? And one of the things that I noticed as a grassroots educator was that the approved vendor list that is currently available is not very refined and may not accurately reflect what those approved vendors are, which subprograms they're actually working in. In particular, there are a number of approved vendors who indicate that they work in the DG subprogram but are not actually doing that. They may not be ready to do that yet. So the idea is that in order to get on that list, particularly the DG subprogram list, the approved vendor must demonstrate somehow that they are committed to operating in the DG subprogram. And this was John's idea. They should be required to do that by demonstrating the availability of project offers via draft contract or term sheets. And again, the program administrator would only provide that list of generated AV names for those companies that demonstrate an offer. This also raises a question of where this should live. Website, the obvious answer seems to be the Solar for All website. I know there's been some complaints and issues with it about it being hard to use. So I would say, yes, it should be on the Solar for All website. It just has to be easy to find and use. And so another potential issue that this raises is, what about those people who don't have access to the internet or a computer, or just really don't want to deal with it? You know, they don't like using a system like that. So someone suggested that we also require the program administrator to have some kind of a customer service rep available at a toll-free number who could provide the equivalent service by walking the potential customer through these questions and gathering that information. Another question I've had is, well, what potential role is there for grassroots educators? And what I've thought could be really helpful would be to have grassroots educators assist customers using and accessing the portal. For instance, at a grassroots events, you could bring a laptop, you could have laptops available. You could walk people through, or at your office, or even beyond the grassroots educators, any other organization that wants to assist people in this program could help them with that portal. So that's about it for me. I did want to mention that there is talk from IPA and Elevate about a stakeholder process regarding this customer AV matchmaking, and that was tentatively scheduled, I believe, for this summer. I haven't heard if that's going to happen this summer or not, but it is going to happen. And then finally, this web-based portal, we believe, could operate in tandem with this proposal that John is now going to present regarding the DG subprogram.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Appreciate you doing that overview. And before I even start with my introduction and diving into this RFP layer, I did just want to tee these up as being layers and as being additive to one another. And so you can probably find yourself easily imagining this matchmaking system that Kim just went through, even if you have a harder time imagining this RFP process. So it's not that one requires the other. These are just additional layers of benefit and possibly complexity as we go through some programmatic reform. So that sort of caveat aside, I'm John Delury. I'm the Midwest Campaigns Director for Vote Solar. In all the ways that Kim has the background and the perspective of one of the grassroots education organizations, I at least try to bring some of the perspective from the approved vendor perspective, in part because prior to this role, I worked for an approved vendor and I worked closely with about 10 customers in the residential DG subprogram. And so I encountered some barriers along the way. I think that some of these changes might address some of those barriers. In no way are they comprehensive, and in every way they are draft. And so we are very open to feedback and just hoping to pitch these as strawman proposals that, you know, we hope will receive substantial feedback and things that we might not be thinking of currently. So again, caveats aside, this would be the second layer. And the idea here is that we believe there are two potential problems within the program. One is that there's really no ability to incentivize specific procurement goals within the sort of first come, first serve format that the DG subprogram is taking. So there are baseline metrics that Solar for All requires around hiring graduates of the workforce development programs and around consumer protections and things like that. There's no really added incentive for going above and beyond, for guaranteeing higher customer savings or for hiring additional employees from those workforce development programs. So that's one thing that we think this solves. There's also a chance that it just incentivizes AVs, approved vendors, to join the Solar for All program and to participate for reasons that I'll get into in just a second, but it does overcome that barrier of customer acquisition being such a slog in this program and very difficult, because a big chunk of that would now be done by the program administrator, and approved vendors would just be competing to receive or serve a bundle of customers or beneficiaries. So let me dive in. I just wanted to sort of set the stage with what this hopes to accomplish. And this is sort of the rough mechanics of how it might do that. So some of you may be familiar with Solarize projects. This is essentially just customer aggregation. You work through a nonprofit or a community-based organization to gather a whole number of people that all want to go solar at the same time. And you use that customer aggregation to better navigate and better understand different offers from different solar companies and contractors. We'd like to borrow some of the benefits from that type of program and try to merge it with Solar for All. And in this case, the program administrator would be essentially the Solarize program manager and would onboard customers, ideally through this new matchmaking portal and process. They would do a little bit of pre-screening. They would certainly do some income verification along the way. And then they would essentially bundle those customers up and figure out which approved vendor is best suited to serve that bundle or that group of customers. So obviously some of the big considerations are just geographic service territory, which approved vendors are able and willing to compete in this space. And frankly, with where the program currently is, there might only be a couple of approved vendors that are able to compete in this RFP the way the program is currently designed, if any. Some regions of the state might not have any approved vendors who are doing DG programs in particular. But hopefully, eventually that won't be the case, and there will be more approved vendors doing more projects and having more offers. And so this imagines multiple vendors being able to compete for a bundle of customers. If there's only one vendor, then it's just a better way to connect customers with that specific vendor. But it's very different than just picking and choosing favorites. It relies on the fact that there aren't that many vendors, and we need to be connecting customers to vendors that have real opportunities and real programs. So assuming that these do become competitive, this allows the community groups and all of the stakeholders that would like to be engaged to create a scoring system to determine what facets of the contractor, essentially, that they'd like to incentivize and prioritize. So part of the hope is that this could lure in additional approved vendors. Part of the hope is that this would help grassroots education organizations filter customers in and connect them with approved vendors. So it's another layer of complexity, but it is a really beneficial one to help build that bridge between customers and the companies that are willing to serve them. So there are some questions here. I'm sure you've already read them as I've been blabbing on, but I encourage you to take a closer look and to help us, frankly, determine what the pros and cons of this approach might look like. Especially if you're an approved vendor, it's really interesting to know if this feels like a value add or a value subtract. So we're open to any and all feedback. And just in a second, I'll show you how this plugs into the program through a series of diagrams. But that sort of closes out this subsection. Okay. So let me.
So John, I have a question for you. Should I save it?
Well, here, I'm gonna. Hey everybody, had to pivot over to a different deck here. So just picking up where I left off, that was the RFP process. This is how we hope they might layer on top of one another. It also might help people who are less familiar with how the actual program implementation process works. That being said, I'm certain that I've made mistakes along the way, so I also am open to feedback about how representative this really is of Illinois Solar for All. So this is essentially designed to be the program as it currently unfolds, and it is in part designed to highlight where some of these barriers are. So if you imagine yourself as a potential Solar for All customer, you've heard about the program, you're excited to participate. Your only way into the program is essentially through an approved vendor. And you can find them through the Solar for All website. It's a little bit difficult to do, but you would need to enter the program through a company. And so typically what happens is the vendors find customers and are responsible for a lot of the customer acquisition there, which is a whole separate conversation. But again, and just highlighting that there's really only one point of entry. And as of the most recent plan, the program administrator is expected to be doing some income verification for customers. So if a customer requests that they'd like to have their income pre-verified, they can get a certificate and use that to make a more compelling case to contractors and to the approved vendors here. You'll notice up in the top left corner, grassroots education organizations are out there doing terrific work to educate about the program and about the benefits of Solar for All and how it works and how solar works and how net metering works. So they are preparing very fertile ground, but it's tricky to currently connect customers to the program directly. Their options are somewhat limited, and really their best opportunity is to send customers to that Solar for All website, which might not be the most seamless introduction to the program. We've heard anecdotally that can cause some frustrations along the way. And so matchmaking, as I'm about to show, might help there. So the other layer of complexity here, which I haven't mentioned up to this point, is that approved vendors are having a difficult time figuring out how they can finance or secure financing for distributed generation projects. Just because of the way the program is structured, it is difficult to do anything other than a zero down, low cost power purchase agreement, PPA, or a lease. And that has its own series of complexities for the vendors. And so I will allow, I worked for an approved vendor. I don't speak for them now, and I don't speak for the approved vendor community. So I encourage them to bring up what some of those frustrations are. I just know they exist. And essentially, if you can't self-finance or find a financing institution that's willing to do a handful or a small number of small projects, you're essentially out of luck. So this becomes a dead end here. So if the AV can't secure financing, they're at a dead end. If they can find some way to finance it themselves, they're likely to do a lease or a PPA that would work for the customers. Then if the customer that they've found and worked with throughout the process qualifies by income, then they will check to see if they have deferred maintenance issues, if there are any problems with the home. If they don't have any deferred maintenance issues, the home looks good, the roof looks good, the electrical looks good, then the project can proceed as currently envisioned. If they don't qualify by way of income, they might be referred to the adjustable block program. The vendor itself might be able to offer something through the adjustable block program, which is the general market program. They might not. And so that customer might hit a dead end and just sort of float away into the solar abyss. Similarly, if there's deferred maintenance issues, there currently isn't a mechanism to help remedy those. So if the approved vendor comes in and finds a hole in the roof, it's sort of game over for Solar for All, and it's unfortunate for that customer. So you'll see that there's a series of ways that it can go wrong currently, and that there might be a lack of opportunities to bring customers in and to engage them at whatever level is most comfortable for them, to meet them where they are. So this is kind of the first level of complexity. And I'm going to drag this box down. So the most important thing to note, I think, is that everything that was in that first slide, everything that is currently enabled and allowed and incentivized through the Solar for All program is still enabled, allowed, and incentivized. So this portion here that I'm circling with my mouse is essentially unchanged. So all vendors that are currently working in the program or trying to figure out how to work in the program can continue that search because it doesn't overhaul it. It just adds layers on top of it. So what you'll notice up front is that this customer can now enter the program in multiple ways. They can work through the grassroots education organizations, and via those organizations connect with the program administrator and that portal or clearinghouse. Or let's say they're just online or they've heard about the program, they can just go to the Solar for All website and enter their information directly as an onboarding mechanism, which Kim very eloquently described earlier. So now they're doing income verification and they're doing some pre-qualification. So all of these customers that come through are figuring out pretty early on if they're a good fit for the program and if they might qualify. This creates additional benefits for the approved vendor. There are less hurdles for pre-screening and income qualification and everything else. And so it adds tremendous value, not just to the customer, but also to our efforts of bringing more approved vendors into the project. So the only change that I'll point out in this bottom tranche is I'd like to at least consider adding a ride-along program for deferred maintenance funds. I don't have any idea of how that happens. I have bounced it off a few people. I don't really see any clear resolve there, but it's a shame that we can't make this more wraparound to help the customer not only go solar and save a bunch of money, but also mend that hole in their leaky roof. So that's the only change here. The change here is that RFP process that I was just describing. So now the question is, the program administrator is doing this income qualification. They're doing some of the pre-screening. If the customer doesn't qualify because now the program administrator is doing all of the income qualification, they're in good hands and they'll be sent directly to the adjustable block program or, given information about how to proceed with solar, even though they're not a fit for Illinois Solar for All. However, if they do qualify based on income, if they check off some of these pre-screening boxes where they own the 1 to 4 unit building, then they can go into this RFP that I described earlier. You'll notice here, if they don't, if they're not a landlord or a homeowner of a 1 to 4 unit building, and they're a large multi-unit building, there are ways that the program administrator can connect them with alternative options. So they can connect them with community solar approved vendors. They can connect them with approved vendors that are specializing in multifamily housing. So this just ensures that even though the approved vendor that they found first can't do their type of project, their apartment, they're not lost. They are still being plugged in and directed to whatever company can best meet their needs. So the program administrator would function as this RFP adjudicator. They would help to collect bids. They would help to determine who checks off the most boxes as, again, designed by the community. This is a sample list. In no way am I attached to this. This has not been bounced off of anybody else. I think it's just helping me at least envision what that could look like. And so then they would be connected directly to the approved vendor that has this ability to self-finance and was able to compete in the RFP. So now here's the next layer. And all that really